Oh, that's a bit of audio that we can start off with. Is Lewis drinking water. Um, welcome to what is episode 27? Storymode. Hi. If you've never seen the show before, this is a book club style podcast, if I can speak, where we talk about a game that we played over the last several weeks. So, this time we played a game called Gorogoa, which is a very storybook-esque hand-drawn puzzle game. Just prior warning, this is a spoiler show, so literally everything that we are going to be talking about is related to spoilers for the game Gorogoa. So if you are sensitive to spoilers, I highly recommend that you tune out now and go play the game and then watch the recorded version later, either on YouTube or listen to it on SoundCloud, or type an exclamation point podcast in the chat watching live, and subscribe to the RSS feed. Real quick, we're going to do introductions. So, Lewis, how are you doing today?
I'm doing good. So yeah, hi, I'm Lewis, also known as LRFLEW. I'm really bad at these intros.
It's like it's your signature at this point. And Eggman,
Yeah.
how's your day been?
Yeah, it's been pretty good. Pretty calm over on my side here, so don't have much to report this week.
Just a high quality day off.
Yes.
I slept terribly, so hopefully I don't lose my voice. I was losing my voice a little bit at work last night, which was like kind of for no reason. I was just like, I don't know. I guess I did too much talking this week, or last week rather. But anyway, so let's get right into it. This is the second game from the publisher and Annapurna. I'm actually not sure how to say it.
Annapurna.
Annapurna? I don't know. Anyway, this is the second game from that publisher that we played. The first one was What Remains of Edith Finch. So their impeccable taste set a high bar alongside of the overwhelmingly positive reviews. A little bit of history. The developer for this game worked on it for 5 years by himself. He hired a composer. The game is entirely hand-drawn, and as I mentioned earlier, is a very storybook-ish game. It's on a lot of platforms. It's literally available on anything, and it's very short.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
I was just gonna say I saw on Wikipedia it's like available on Windows, iOS, and the Nintendo Switch.
Yeah.
Like that's what it listed.
Yeah, it's to my knowledge, they're working on a port for Xbox and PS4, but I mean it would work just fine. Move around. Anyway, so this is, at least for me, gonna be kind of a difficult one to talk about. I did 2 playthroughs and I got a little bit lost both times. So essentially the basic gist of it is you are a small boy, and or you're guiding a small boy to try and feed a dragon, which is the Gorogoa, I guess.
I didn't think that you were feeding him. I thought that you were collecting, and this is kind of diving right into it, but like at the very beginning, you see the dragon, and then you like go look at a book and you're trying to figure out what this dragon is, and you see underneath the picture of the dragon there is a bowl of 5 fruits.
Yeah.
And so you're collecting these 5 fruits, and it's not really clear. I think there's a lot of symbolism in here that you just kind of have to guess at, and so I'm very
I felt like this was fairly clear that it was a diagram of the 5 fruits in a bowl as an offering, because the pose that the 2 characters you see, kind of the young boy and the old man holding it up, is a kind of a classic pose for it being an offering.
There's more characters than just the 2. There's the young boy, the old man, and then the middle-aged boy, or like the teenager.
young adult.
Young adult, yeah, sure, like mid-20s. Because throughout the game, you're crossing what seems to be space-time, or at least teleporting, because the way the game works is you have 4 panels, and you're dragging them around and moving them over top of each other, and they're almost like stencils at times. So you pull one off and move it over here, and that allows him to walk from one panel to the other. And there is several very distinct worlds in this game. There's the one with the old man, the one with the middle-aged person, and then the one with the kid. And the one with the kid is kind of overgrown very green and nice looking. The one with the middle-aged one is very war-torn and everything's broken, and there's always like either explosions or like air raid sirens. And then there's the one with the old man, where everything is kind of rebuilt, but still not quite as green as.
Were you guys under the impression that those 3 aged characters are the same character? Because that's the idea that I got by the time I got to the end.
Same.
Yeah, the impression I got was the 5 characters
5?
were the same person.
Okay, where did you get 5 from?
The 5
It's
in
hard-
1 character.
It's hard to distinguish them, but the very getting like straight to the end sequence, there's that part where you see all the fruit kind of blacked out in the diagram, and you have to click on each one. And when you click on it, you end up at a thought for 5 different people. And as I understood it, those were 5 stages in the boy's life: young, kind of adolescent, kind of, I don't know,
College
young
age, maybe.
adults, kind
Just
of
say young
middle
adult.
aged and old or something.
Yeah, I don't think that they were differentiated very well, because I was kind of under the same impression as Blind, is that they were only 3. But now that you mention it, that does seem to match up pretty well. So maybe they could have done a little bit better job there, but I think that the gist of it was that you can see that there's time is passing in some way, maybe not in a linear fashion.
Something I wanted to mention, I use the word eating, is because I pulled that from a Wikipedia article, and a description of the game, which was you travel through space, time, and dimensions. This was a preview from ages ago that I found on Polygon, which was you travel through space, time, and dimensions to feed a dragon fruits, which was the fear of your childhood. So that was back from like when the demo was released in 2014, after he'd been working on it for several years already.
And so does that quote come from Jason Roberts, or is that something that somebody just
That was a write-up.
made up?
That was a write-up. So
Well,
good question.
that kind of makes me question a little bit how that was, who wrote that, basically, because at the beginning of the game, it seemed not that you were afraid of the dragon, but that you were curious about it, and that's why you were looking it up in a book and trying to figure out how to feed it, right? So,
or trying to figure out how to make it go away,
or
maybe?
go away, or whatever. Yeah, like it didn't seem like I never got the impression at any point that you were scared of it until the very end, where you make the offering and it all turns into black and then catches on fire and you fall through the clouds. So
I was incorrect. It's Kotaku. It's an article called "The Puzzle of a Lifetime."
okay,
I'll plop it in chat for you.
I guess if it's a Kotaku article, they could have literally made up whatever they got out of it. So I think that's just one interpretation.
Yeah, but
I mean, there's no dialogue in this
It's an
game.
interesting perspective.
Yeah.
So it's worth clarifying a little bit about the mechanics of the game. So as Blind mentioned, everything takes place on a 2x2 grid, and you have the tiles that basically are little snapshots into the world of what's going on. And the puzzles are basically comprised of 3 major actions. You can either try to move a tile and it splits into 2, so there's a foreground and background. So that splits into 2 different worlds, and so the background reveals something behind it. So there might be a guy thinking about some sort of object, and then when you pull the thought bubble away from what he's thinking about, you can zoom that out, and there's a lot more in that space of where he was thinking. You can then combine, so if you have an overlay, something with a hole in it, you can place it back on top of another compatible tile, and it fills in that gap. Or you can kind of overlay something on top of it. So there's one instance where you have a cutout of a doorway, and you have to place that onto a wall so that the character can walk through it.
I really liked those puzzles where you get a thought and then you zoom out, or you zoom in on the thought, you pull the thought off, you zoom back out, and then you place a different thought to make him walk in a direction back into his brain.
Yeah.
Which was kind of gave
that
me
was a
stick it to
really
the man.
interesting one
Yes.
late game, because they
Thoughts.
had different ways of trying to present how it was possible that he had arrows, what in that area had directions. And it was it was a really cool setup. And the
This
third puzzle type is sometimes a tile will show you different things depending on where it is in that grid. So if
Yeah.
you move it up, it goes up and so on and so forth.
we have a
Within the
total of
tiles, you
4
also have,
tiles within one. The image
yeah,
shifts like a window into a big image instead of like a small image that you can.
yeah. You also have interactions within a tile. Generally, you can click on a section to zoom in. There's also a zoom out button, and sometimes there's left, right, up, and down buttons, so you can just pan the view. But most of those are contextual, and it's really hard to get like stuck in the sense that you're not sure what you can do, because once you've sort of figured out where you're going, it will generally block you off from backtracking.
Yeah, I did like that, and I think it was very well put together in that respect. I would say that I did get stuck sometimes because there's some things that are a little bit obtuse, like you have to put certain tiles on in a certain order. Like, for example, the clock puzzle. I had all the tiles in place, and but when I dragged the last one on top of it, it was like, oh no, you can't do this. You need to put the other one on first, and I got stuck on that for a while. So
I got stuck on that one too, but I get the impression that this is kind of a fiddly puzzle game. It's not quite the I'm just gonna sit down and solve this. It's more just the oh, here's like a bunch of different items, and I'm just gonna fiddle with them until I figure out how it works. If that makes sense. I do agree
Yeah.
that it's obtuse, but there's also quite literally nothing like it. I've never seen this format of puzzle game ever. So when you're playing something that's extremely unique, sometimes you'll run into things that seem obtuse, or are obtuse. But that's not necessarily a fault of the game. It's a fault of innovation or doing something different.
yeah, maybe.
Hmm.
I did like the puzzles in the game, especially the ones that required you to get a certain set of tiles so that you could line up their edges, and then when they were together, they did something special. Like my favorite ones were the ones where you had the gears puzzles, and for example, there was one where there was a guy walking across the desert, and on one side of the desert there was a sun, and you had to go find a book on a shelf in another world that had a sun on it, and then when you zoomed in on it, the top half of the sun would match up with the bottom half of the sun in the desert, and then the guy walking across the desert would ring a bell 3 times and stop, and then he would continue walking, and the sun would
Rotate.
interlock with the wall of the it was like a castle wall basically behind it, and it would have to rotate to an image in the book, which would it was very cool. It's kind of
Yeah.
hard to
It's a neat
describe.
effect.
Yeah.
There was
I forgot there's 4 mechanics. The one I forgot was that tiles in a certain direction to each other in the right settings will line up, and they smooth the border so objects in one half can interact with objects in the other. And that's one of the first ones you do. The very first solution to the puzzle is you have to line up 3 tiles, one with the fruit on the tree that you need, one with a bird hanging on a branch, and one with the actual basket on the bottom, so that when the bird flies off, it shakes the fruit, it falls down into the basket.
some of the puzzles, or when you solve most of the puzzles, they turn into almost like a pseudo cutscene and move into like the next screen. Or when they start moving, you know that you've probably solved it. Or when they do something different, sometimes they're pre-animated and consistently doing something. But there was one puzzle where there's like a stone falling out of a box that you've aligned earlier, and it initially it breaks a like a vase, and then just like falling down, and like screwing around with space time, you have to like zoom out of a building and like rearrange it underneath it and make this tiny little rock that's like very small become a giant boulder and roll down the outside of the building, and then back into the building later as a tiny rock again to break a like a thing that a moth is trapped in. It's like dome, like Beauty and the Beast, the rose covering
Yeah.
type thing. I don't know the name for it.
I don't know the name for it.
But hopefully people know what I'm talking about. But so it breaks it, and that puzzle, I don't know why, but it was so cool when I solved that puzzle. I involuntarily stood up. I've I think the only time a game's done that to me is when I was solving puzzles in Portal, but that was also like so it's like I'm so stupid because I got really stuck on that one for a while and I felt like a genius.
That one I did kind of have like a moment of inspiration because like I was like, oh, some of these banners line up, and I zoom out and I was like, I'm supposed to do something with this rock. I can't figure it out.
Yep.
And I'm like, oh, I see now. And then, like you see all the banners, and you're like, oh, there's more banners over here. Let's just line them all up.
Yep.
Yeah, as I mentioned, the tiles have to line up for them to conjoin like that, and so they'll give hints, different colored banners or different like colored. There's one very late in the game where you have to kind of mess with a railroad track map that shows the track colors, and then in the other one you also see like ladders of similar colors. So you have to realize that you can line those up to match.
Yeah.
Yeah, the latter one stumped me for a bit because I was being a little bit dense and I was like, well, this red ladder doesn't lead anywhere. He just walks up and walks down. What am I doing wrong? And it was just like, oh, you have to switch the tile out beneath it but before he goes back down.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The train puzzle, I think that it was a little bit so the railroad map had about 5 different colors on it, but you only ever use 3 of them. So I thought that was a little bit strange. It would have felt a little bit more, oh, maybe it was the 5 colors of the fruits. Yeah, that was probably it. But you don't use all 5 colors, which I thought was a little bit strange.
Yeah, I could see that.
This game definitely has a lot of eureka moments in it. Like you'll just kind of look at something and you'll be staring at it for a bit and fiddling with it, and then it'll just be like, oh, I get it. Which to me is a sign of a well-designed puzzle game, honestly. Another thing, actually, about the development of the game that I found kind of interesting when I was reading up on it, apparently the developer threw out about half of it at one point and remade it.
Which I mentioned that one of the biggest problems with developing something like this over a long time is that at a certain point your skill increases over time, and so particularly with art there can be a drastic difference between the early stuff and the late stuff that he kept having to throw stuff out and redoing it because it just didn't match the new style or even his new skills.
Yeah, because it was developed over a very long period of time. Development started, the earliest reports of development that I found was 2011, and the game was announced in 2012. Like this game has been around and in development for a long time. But we mentioned symbolism earlier, and I'm curious as to what Lewis meant by that.
I think I mentioned it.
Was it you?
Okay. Yeah. Basically, I thought that when I got to the end of the game, I thought that there was a couple of different themes that we could kind of apply to the game as a whole.
Mm-hmm.
One of them being, since we're collecting fruits, is this like a sort of forbidden fruit type story? Because right after you collect all the fruits, like you fall down through the clouds and it gets all dark and that sort of thing. Is it a folly of man story? Because at the beginning it's all nice and green, but then immediately after it's like, oh, everything's destroyed, war-torn country. But it does get built back up. But by the time that happens, the protagonist is an old man, so maybe I don't know. What do you guys think about those sorts of things?
I mean, it definitely hits a lot of it's like the main bit of symbolism I got out of it was actually partially caused by reading the story of the name of the game, which was it was the developer's childhood monster. And the reason he decided to go with that name is because he wanted the game to have no language, and because Gorogoa is a made-up word, it doesn't mean anything. It's just the name of the creature. it would work for anybody in any language, which I thought was interesting because there is no text in the game. There's a little bit of text on the side of books, but it's a made up language. It all
I found
Go on.
the language setting kind of funny because there's only about 6 words that you need to translate in the game on the settings
start,
page.
pause, resume. But chapters.
It's not even a main menu for this game, which is really interesting. You start it up and it just takes you straight to the beginning of the game.
Yeah, when you finish the game, it goes back to the beginning. But I think it's like not necessarily a coming of age story, but like the journey through life and the battle against things that you encounter along the way and kind of overcoming that and facing your monsters, I guess. That's what I got out of it mostly. Because it's whenever, like, every single puzzle is kind of a portion of the boy's life, right? And then the monster appears and then you move on to the next one. And it's kind of like he's almost waiting for it, he's studying it, he's thinking about it, and growing up throughout the game. Even though, like, he's a child, but you also see him as an adult. Then there's also the question of, are each of these characters that we have the same, or are they different? Because of that Kotaku article that I read, it almost leads me to believe that they are separate people in parallel universes, if you want to get really complicated. But I don't feel like frying my brain.
That's an interesting interpretation. I will say that when I was trying to figure out what I thought this story was, I kind of hit a really interesting sticking point, and I found 2 kind of possible answers to it, but they each take a compromise. So one of the earliest things that happens in the game is, you're following the boy, he sees the dragon, he looks it up in the book, he kind of goes out onto a roof, and as part of that, you end up with the second tile, and in the second tile, you see the old man. And so assuming that that it's the same person, you suddenly have the 2 different ages for that character, and you have to use both of those tiles to get the first fruit. And similarly, every other fruit involves you having to interact with older versions of this character. And so the question is, how do we make sense of all that? The idea that maybe the older characters are somehow helping the younger character, but still keep like a continuity of time. This idea that timeline is linear. And I found that you had to, like, 2 interpretations. Either you stick with a linear timeline and those sort of 2 attempted offerings to the dragon. The one as a boy, he grew up, and then he tried it again as an adult after learning his mistake. Or you take sort of a non-linear approach. So it's similar to Arrival. Some spoilers for Arrival, I guess, but in that movie, they kind of create this concept that causality can kind of be with non-linear time. So there's one point towards the end where information that one of the character learns in the future helps her resolve the issue in the past. And it kind of builds up to this idea that maybe time is like singular, not necessarily a linear thing, in which case you can interpret it as all the different stages of his life coming together to solve the issue of the dragon. So there's only ever one offering, which kind of correlates with the diagram towards the beginning where you see the 2 characters, the young boy and the old man, holding up the basket together. And so the question more is, which one of those are you willing to give up? The more literal nature of, the different versions of him helping him out, or trying to keep a linear timeline?
I guess I would like to say that it's linear, but that the encounters that the characters have, that characters have with each other, are kind of a metaphorical sense of, like,
Memory,
if
thought.
I could, yeah, it's like if as an older character I could go back and help my younger self, or teach myself, like, give myself advice, what am I going to do? Although, I mean, there's not really any advice that's exchanged. It's more just like physical ways of, helping them along. Although I suppose you could probably find some metaphorical thing with whatever environment you're in. I don't really know. I didn't think about it that much, I guess. Do you have one that you like over the other blind of the ones that Lewis described?
I really like the um that time is non-linear one, because large portions of the game, you know, with the stencil puzzles where you're pulling off a piece and putting it here, he walks from timeline to timeline. So you are traveling through. Either you're some sort of time lord from Doctor Who, or you're traveling through space time some way. Like you as then there's also the question of what is the player of the game. Who are you? What are you, and how are you controlling this whole thing? Is the kind of the one other thing that I was thinking about while playing it. I mean, I just worked off of the assumption for the entire game that time wasn't linear in this world. Something to do with the dragon, maybe something to do with his life experience or something, has broken time, and you are going from parallel universe to parallel universe, confronting yourself at different ages to fight this thing together. That was kind of just how I interpreted it while I was playing it, at least during my second playthrough. But it made me think, what is the player? What are you supposed to be in this, if anything? Unless it's just like a strictly mechanics and you're just playing a game. But sometimes with games like this, I feel like there's at least a thought in the back of the developer's head of what the player as a character is, if the player is.
Yeah, I don't know. Like, we don't ever really see the protagonist like do any jobs. He's mostly just sitting at desks and reading or studying. So maybe he's just maybe he's a very scholastic person and he just enjoys, you know, learning as much as he can, or
even
learning about history.
Even in the war-torn timeline, like literally his window's getting blown out by shelling and he's still reading. So
yeah. At least once you turn the light back on for him.
Yeah.
Poor guy. He was sad because the light got blown out. That was a fun puzzle.
Okay, I also want to go back to this idea of the dragon as a childhood monster, and I want to make sure that I understand the context in which this monster is understood, or the monster is whatever. That sentence was redundant. But when I think of a childhood monster, I think of like monsters under the bed, something that you're afraid of. But it doesn't really seem to be the case for me in this game, because you're, like I said at the very beginning, you're curious about the dragon and you look it up in a book and you want to go make the sacrifice or feed it, or with the fruits that you collect, right? So is the dragon an object of fear in that way, or is it an object of more fascination?
Are we saying, is the dragon an adversary, or is the dragon a curiosity?
Yeah.
Or is the dragon just a symbol for something?
Possibly, yeah.
When I played through it, I never really considered it as symbolism, but I did consider it as, I did think of it more as like a nuisance, like the idea that he was doing this offering to get rid of it, but never really thought about it as symbolic in a kind of real sense.
Is he trying to get rid of it, or is he trying to understand it? Because he's always studying it. Like, that's the first thing that he does when he sees the dragon. He picks up a book and starts reading.
I'd understand that as more of less study and more research, in a sense that there's this dragon here. How do I get rid of it? Oh, I know. I have a book that talks about all the things. So if I find it in all of the things, then it will tell me how to deal with it.
But with research, you don't necessarily want to get rid of it. Like, especially if you're so keen, like the dragon wasn't hurting anything at the beginning of the book. So why would you immediately jump to that the research would have been done to find out a way to kill the dragon?
Maybe. I mean, maybe he was just looking up to see if it was dangerous, but I don't know. That's not how I had interpreted it first.
You know, actually, this is interesting. So at the very beginning, you just look through a book and it's a bunch of, pictures of different things. Like one of them is a fish that somehow looks like the dragon. Then there's like paw prints and there's a skeletal hand. And then eventually you get to the page with the dragon on it and the bowl of fruit with the old man and the young man holding it up. But at the end of the game, when you're restoring the memories and kind of replaying through all of the fruits that you collected,
That puzzle.
Yeah.
when you flip through the book, there's the image that you eventually turn back into the fruit or the memory or whatever is red, and it's on a page stained with blood, and that's very interesting.
Yeah,
I don't
was
know if there's
wondering about
any
the blood.
because that's really the only point in the whole story that you get like real blood or anything. Even in the war-torn places, it's just like disheveled, destroyed buildings. I guess there's some fire, but
there's an
Explosions often back then.
implication based on I forget, there's a very fancy name for this in film where you edit two shots together to create a meaning. But there's an example of that towards the very end. So the first time you try to do the offering, you hold up the bowl and you had the 6 fruits, and there's sort of this implication that it didn't work. And the boy is falling off the tower, and you see him falling, and stops right before the impact. And then it transitions to what looks like a slightly older version of him in a wheelchair, right in front of that spot, which kind of implies that he got hurt and he got stuck in the wheelchair because of it.
yeah.
And so that, blood also correlates with injury as well. So it's possible that since that first one, because that section that you're referring to where you see the 5 circles blacked out representing each of the fruit, each one seems to be, a slightly different aged version. That's because when you click on it, you move it away, it's a thought of one of those 5. And that first one of the boy that you mentioned was red, that if it was in blood, that might correlate with the injury that the boy had.
Oh, that's good. That's a good connection. Yeah, I think that makes sense.
So would that mean that they are all the same person instead of jumping through timelines, or are we still jumping through timelines at least for the purpose of the story?
I'm still working on under the assumption that it's the same person, but even if they were different people, there might be some way to do that. It doesn't feel like any one read is 100% accurate so far. I haven't found anything that just clicked and was like, oh, that makes sense.
I always kind of, I really actually like it when game developers kind of leads some of those things up to question. It just kind of, it's one of the reasons why I liked Californium so much. Like, there was a lot of questions that it posed, and yeah, I just didn't have anything more than that.
You like picking things apart and talking about it. It's fun.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's why this show is fun.
Yeah.
It's an excuse to play through a weird obtuse game and then sit down and go, okay, so that was weird and obtuse, and then the show ends and we're like, yep, still weird and obtuse.
Yeah. I wanted to ask one more question about the dragon. We didn't really come to a conclusion whether it was an object of fascination or of fear, but would you assign it? What?
Trying to refer to the meme. Like, why can't it be both? Like, I mean, imagine, like, in very Western cultures, a tiger represents both something to fear. It's a predator, it's aggressive, but also kind of something of worth. The idea that hunters try to hunt it down because it's indicative of power. And so they tried to do that to kind of show their power. And so maybe the dragon's kind of in a similar vein. He's looking at it as dangerous, something that could hurt the city, but this offering might make it peaceful or might push it away or whatever.
Yeah. So I think that you're probably right too, that it could be both. Even at different points in the protagonist's life. The other question that I wanted to ask about the dragon, though, was that is it good or evil if we're going to assign it one of those? If we had to assign it, which one would it be? Because my thought was that it was evil, because when you make the offering and like its eye appears in the sky as you're standing on the clouds, and then all the rings of different color around it start to disappear, and then it, I guess I thought that it was making the decision itself to drop you through the clouds or to abandon you or whatever, but it seemed very cold and yeah.
I think I would go with indifferent.
Yeah, I guess maybe it's more not good or evil per se, but
Yeah.
more like a force of nature.
Yeah, I mean, like, it's like saying that a volcano is evil. Is a volcano evil? No, not really. It's a naturally occurring thing that can cause mass destruction, but it's not evil. It's just there. And that's like I never really thought of the dragon while playing through the game as an adversary or a thing to fear. It was always more just a thing of curiosity, a thing to understand, and a thing to
Do you think that the
not
dragon
learn
was
more about.
sentient? Do
I
you
mean,
think that it was actively making decisions, and or is it more like a force of nature where it just whatever happens happens because that's the way things are?
I don't know.
Good question.
There's a lot that I feel like, we could be here all day talking about specifics. I mean, my theory about it kind of being a nonlinear timeline starts to fall apart around, I think, the fourth fruit when he starts walking through the paintings, because that doesn't as much make sense with my interpretation. You also have things like in a similar area, I think it's that or the fruit before, where you're looking at all these kind of pictures, environments, and then once you solve that part of the puzzle, the dragon appears. It goes from daytime to nighttime, and then you zoom out and it's a different area, and you have to use that part to solve the puzzle, and then you zoom in again and you solve the puzzle there, and then dragon appears again, changes the environment, you zoom out and it's now different. And so what the dragon's doing in that scene might also change the interpretation of the dragon as a whole.
How so?
I'm not entirely sure. And that's the thing, we could be here all day trying to discuss it because there's so many details to this.
Now that we're talking about it more, I really do think that the dragon is more a force of nature. It doesn't really make decisions. It's kind of like we think of Mother Nature as a uh, a force, just something that we can't really have an effect on it, and it will continue on even without our input or without us caring about it. We can hurt it as humans, I suppose, but I think that the dragon wouldn't is kind of above making decisions that affect like one person individually, I guess.
A lot of thought. Just thinking.
Yeah.
I
If I had
like
to
the more
summarize this episode so far, we've presented conflicting theories, and then never decided on a single one to try to actually continue the discussion in a meaningful manner.
Yeah.
But I don't know, like theories are just theories. They're theories for a reason. They are not proved. Like we could decide on one, but that doesn't make it any better or worse than the other ones because there's nobody here to
No,
confirm or
but we
deny
can't
them.
build on any theory if we can't agree on a theory to talk about.
So what theory would you like to build on?
I don't know. And I think that's...
So let's build on the theory that the dragon is a force of nature, so not malevolent, and time is, at least to an extent, linear. Like within reason. So unless you want to go with the non-linear timeline theory. Because I really like the idea that the dragon is just kind of a thing that exists, at least within the character's realm of existence, maybe not necessarily everybody else's. That or go ahead.
I just had a little bit of a thought. The main mechanic of the game is that you're looking through these windows. From whose perspective are we looking through the windows? It's probably not the characters because we can see him in there, but could it be the dragons? Because there's multiple points in the game where we focus specifically on the dragon's eye. We rarely see the whole dragon. Actually, I don't think we ever see the whole dragon at once except for the picture in the book. But several times we focus on the eye of the dragon. Could it be that somehow we are looking at it through the dragon's eye, or if the dragon is like an omnipresent entity,
Are you the dragon?
looking itself in the eye? I don't think that makes a ton of sense, but are we looking at the through the windows as somebody else? Or is it just
that goes back to my question from the beginning: is what is the player? You can figure out what the player is, or at least decide on what the player is. That makes a lot of these things a lot easier.
Yeah, I mean, I guess when I was going through it, I didn't really consider the player as a character making actions in the world. Like, I was treating it more like a walking simulator in the sense that you're not doing anything, you're just observing what's actually happening.
That's a good point. Because yeah, like the character, the protagonist doesn't make any decisions for themselves. You like even when they have thoughts, you're dictating their thoughts, right? And you're just lining up the world in a way that they can continue on, right?
Perhaps we're the boy after the whole thing is over, going through a book.
Well, that actually is interesting too, because if the boy isn't really making any decisions and we're just kind of leading him along by the nose, that basically describes a force of nature. Maybe we are the dragon and we're just guiding him along his path in life.
Yeah. Wow.
Yeah.
That's all I can say is wow.
Yeah.
It's hard. I don't think we're going to come to a conclusion on it.
And I mean, that's kind of both a mark of a good game, a good story, and a bad story. Like, you have to be careful to strike a balance between not being so linear that there's only one correct answer and not being too vague as there's no real hint of answers. You have to make it so that it feels like an answer is there, but there's kind of multiple approaches you can go to get to different answers. And I think this game strikes a good balance on that.
Yeah. I don't know. It's fun to just sit down and theorize stuff like that.
Yeah,
I mean, as we've proven, there's a lot of places that you can go with this game.
Considering it's like an hour and a half long, that's kind of impressive.
Yeah.
Like, kind of really impressive.
This podcast is about the same length that most people will take to play the game.
Yeah.
There's actually an achievement for doing it in 30 minutes, I believe.
Really?
Did you get the achievement?
Yeah, I didn't get that achievement yet.
It's a hidden achievement, so yeah.
Okay.
Yeah,
actually,
there's one for doing it like less than 30 seconds. There's one for doing it in like, I think 300 or
30 minutes. It's 500 moves.
I just realized there's a spelling error in the overlay.
Oh, and there's one achievement that apparently never got implemented, so 0% of users have gotten it so far.
So, in case you want to buy this game, definitely don't look at the screen on the.
There's an extra R. Oh well. Oops.
Oh well. Yeah, I don't know if we're going anywhere with this. Are we done? Is this just a short episode, or
I think
does anybody have
personally,
anything else that they want to say? I'm very satisfied with this game. I enjoyed it. The mechanics were very unique and the puzzles were engaging. So yeah.
I might play through it again to try and get that 30-minute achievement. Is it worth the $15? It's cheaper on tablets.
Yeah.
$15 is a little bit high. I remember that when we bought it at the end of the last episode, it was on sale for like 12. I would say 10 is like my ideal point.
I think
10 should be the point that's not on sale.
it's
in my opinion.
17.
I'm
in
also more of
Canada.
a cheapskate, so I'll probably say 5 to 10. Somewhere in there would probably be the sweet spot for me.
Hey,
But-
chat. Lewis makes the overlays. Just to be clear. Anyways, go on.
What? No. What? I
What are we
was
talking
done.
about? What are we talking about? What
Oh,
happened?
there's a spelling
That's-
error in the overlay.
Oops.
Okay. Anyways, now that everybody is aware of this, there's an extra R. But
I'll fix the overlay for after hours.
anyways, as far, like we're not a review show at the end of the day. It's really hard to say that. I think as far as games as art goes, this game could be an art exhibit in and of itself. So there's that, and I would think about it as such. I feel like my money was worth it at full price. Because that's how much I paid for it. Because I didn't buy it during that sale because I was short on money. So I bought it for full price, and I feel like I got my time out of it. I'm happy with it. So, anyways, I think we should wrap up here. Is there anything we want to say before we end? Yes, no?
I give this
Crickets.
game a thumbs up. It's pretty good.
Crickets?
Sure.
Thumbs up. This games is arts. That's all I can say.
3 thumbs up from the best story-based podcast show on BlindiRL's channel.
Probably the only. I actually did some research. I think we're the only show of this form. Anyway, but yeah, thank you very much for watching this kind of shorter episode. Normally we go for episode 27 of Storymode. If you would like to follow the show, you can find us at Real Storymode or just follow episode. That Real Storymode account doesn't tweet until the episode is either live or available for download on SoundCloud. So you don't have to worry about it spamming you or anything. And at the same time, thank you very much for joining us. We also have a curator. So if you want to just have like a Steam curator where you can see the full list of games that we've covered, as well as links to the videos, there's that as well. And yeah, if you're watching this live, thank you very much for watching. And stick around because we're gonna actually talk to the chat in a moment in After Hours, which will not be recorded. And if you are listening to the audio version of this, I don't know how you found it, but thank you very much for listening, and I hope you enjoyed it. And there's also the full video VOD up, which is beneath the Twitch channel, or GG Blind One. So yeah, thank you very much for watching. I think we're gonna switch over to the closing screen now, and we'll see you next month, the next game. Bye.
Bye-bye.